Little Nightmares 1 and 2 are two of my favorite horror games of all time. The games are atmospheric masterpieces, they're smart horror games, and the storytelling is the best of the genre. Little Nightmares 3 is not that. For those of you who don't know, Little Nightmares 1 and 2 were developed by Tarsier Studios, but after Tarsier left Daddy Bandai, they lost the rights to Little Nightmares, and instead Little Nightmares 3 was developed by Supermassive Games. In case you don't know who they are, Supermassive made that one good game in 2015, and then basically never made anything good ever again. And Little Nightmares 3 has lit the fandom on fire. Look, I don't hate Little Nightmares 3. I just heavily dislike it. I could complain about a lot. I bought the game for $50 yet beat it in 4 hours. The game wasn't scary, the villains were boring, day 1 DLC. And overall the game just felt very unfinished. But unfortunately I was late to the algorithm and now everyone's already talking about those problems. So what could I add to the conversation? Well, I could add a lot because my opinion is always objectively correct. But if I want to be original, I can't just do a normal review. Well, one of my favorite parts of the first two games were their final antagonists, the Lady and the Thin Man. So you can probably imagine my disappointment when I met the actual final boss of Little Nightmares 3. Yeah, that's right. Today we're talking about the Hypnotist, aka Otto, aka the Counselor, aka the boss who doesn't do anything in his own game, the main antagonist and final boss of Little Nightmares 3, and how he lives in the shadow of the Thin Man and the Lady. The Hypnotist is the final boss of Little Nightmares 3, and he's in the Institute, the final chapter of Little Nightmares 3. Now, not to be immediately negative, but Little Nightmares 2 already has a hospital area, so having an institute feels very repetitive. Oh wait, I forgot. The Institute isn't a hospital, it's an asylum. What a big difference. Anyways, entering the Institute, we have to deal with killer plants. I'm sorry, but what the hell are these things supposed to mean? Is the Hypnotist a Plants vs. Zombies fan? Anyways, avoiding the plants and this nurse, I guess, we eventually encounter the Hypnotist for the first time. And you know what? I'll give him one positive. I think his introduction is pretty good. We hit this gong and watch this giant thing slither back, only for it to be revealed to be his dirty ass foot. Although, the first problem immediately makes itself clear. Who the hell is this guy? In Little Nightmares 1 and 2, there was so much build up towards the final villains that it felt like this massive moment when you finally faced off against them. But with this Hypnotist guy, we get no explanation for him. Who is he? Why is he in the asylum? Why is he more important than the other monsters? Why are we fighting him? And the game's response is basically just, he's big and he's scary. Ah! Anyways, the Hypnotist chases us throughout the Institute for a bit. His whole mechanic is that he's big, like really big, which is saying a lot considering the fact that a lot of Little Nightmares villains are already really big. Also, he has eyeballs on the palms of his hands, which I guess is kinda scary. On the note of his design, I do like the fact that you never see his entire body, just his limbs and his head. It adds this sense of unknowable horror to him. Although I really don't like how his head looks. He doesn't look scary, he just looks like an angry old guy. It looks like he's about to argue with me about the housing crisis or something. Anyways, he chases us throughout trying to crush us with his big hands until eventually we get the final boss. I'll talk about it more later, but it's pretty okay. After we kill him, he falls into a pit. Cue the sad plot twist ending where Lone dies. The end. Now, from just the standpoint of being a boss, the Hypnotist is pretty decent. And he has the makings of a good final boss, but as is, he's really boring for the big bad the game has been building up to, and especially when he's compared to the two previous final bosses. Hey, speaking of which, I can guarantee you that you are the first person in your bloodline to read the words final boss mogging. The Lady and Thin Man are phenomenal final bosses, and they perfectly represent their respective titles, and they beat the Hypnotist in basically every category possible. Starting with presentation. Presentation can easily make or break any antagonist. The Lady and Thin Man stand out because of how different they are from the other villains in their respective games. The Lady immediately stands out from the other villains in Little Nightmares 1, whereas all the other villains just look like scary monsters who are pretending to be human. The lady actually just looks like a normal person, which immediately makes her stand out. The Thin Man also does the normal looking person thing, but he stands out because of his personality too. Whereas other Little Nightmares enemies go crazy when they chase you, the Thin Man is completely calm and just walks towards you. It's scary because it really highlights how powerful he is that he doesn't even break a sweat when he's chasing you. So what makes the Hypnotist stand out? Well, I mean, he's big. Now, I do appreciate that they didn't try doing the whole they're a normal looking person thing again. I mean, if they did that a third time, it would have been way less effective. And the idea of a kaiju-sized antagonist, that's interesting. The problem, we already have a super big antagonist in the same game, and it's the first boss. Now, I will give Otto this. I think he does the whole super big villain thing way better than the monster baby. But it doesn't matter. When I saw Otto for the first time, I just went, oh, so we're doing another villain like this? Which is not the reaction you want the player to have when they meet your big, final, unique villain. Another problem is the lack of a relationship. Now, with the lady in 6, it's a bit more ambiguous how they're connected, but it is clear that there's a connection. I mean, 6 literally has a dream about the lady. I think that makes it clear. With this connection, there's this almost sense of fate when 6 and the lady fight each other. Meanwhile, the Thin Man is literally mono. But with the Little Nightmares 3, the game never shows me that the protagonists have a connection to Otto, so why should I be super invested when they begin fighting him? Another thing is that the lady and Thin Man both have a sense of authority. The lady is the boss of the maw and is the one the janitor and the chefs work for. She's basically the one who's controlling everything. Meanwhile, the Thin Man lives in the signal tower, which is the core of the city, and also uses the TV to brainwash the residents. The Hypnotist, while more powerful in a physical sense, doesn't have the same dominance as the lady and Thin Man. I mean, I guess there are the nurses who seem to work for him, but that's a pretty loose connection. The other main antagonists, the monster baby, the kin, the meat potential boss, they are all completely disconnected from the Hypnotist. Next is Thematic Relevance. Now, the first 2 games are extremely deep with their metaphors, so much so that I won't be able to get into them today. However, I will be discussing how their final bosses tie into their themes. Little Nightmares 1 is all about consumption, specifically how capitalist societies are based entirely around consuming, and how society manipulates children, removing the innocence from them and turning them into mindless workers, eating them, or turning them into monsters just as terrifying as the ones who perpetuate the system. The lady is a perfect representation of this. She's obviously meant to be a metaphor for the elite who endlessly continue the cycle. Also, she represents the whole corruption of childhood innocence thing, as the game ends with 6 eating the lady and gaining her psychic powers, using them to mercilessly kill the guests and leave them all. Meanwhile, Little Nightmares 2 is about generational trauma, and the Thin Man is the embodiment of generational trauma. It's pretty heavily implied the reason he kidnapped 6 is to try and save Mono and get revenge on 6. But what the Thin Man doesn't understand is that this feeds the cycle of abuse. Because the Thin Man kidnaps 6, this leads to 6 betraying Mono later in the game, and that causes Mono to turn into the next Thin Man. This is meant to be a metaphor for how in situations with generational trauma, choosing to continue the cycle of violence only causes more harm to the younger generation. Now, with those 2 villains having super in-depth, deeper meanings, what does the Hypnotist represent? Well, what is Little Nightmares 3 trying to say about society? The power of friendship. Yeah, Little Nightmares 3 has basically no deeper meaning, and any themes that the game does have all feel extremely disconnected. Like, for example, the game tries to have commentary on capitalism with how the herd behaves, but doesn't feel like the developers actually had anything deep or thought-provoking to say about it. It just kind of feels like the developers went, well, the first 2 games had commentary on consumer culture. That means we have to do it too. Because of this, Otto basically has no deeper meaning. In summary, the lady and Thin Man at first look like generic horror villains, but when you look deeper, it's clear they represent something bigger. Meanwhile, Otto at first looks like a generic horror villain, but when you look deeper, oh yeah, no, he's just a generic horror villain. And then we have the actual boss fight. Okay, you know what? For all my whining and crying and complaining, I will give Otto this. He actually has a good boss fight. It's honestly kind of sad he's such a bad villain, because if he was a good one, he had the capacity to be the best final boss. Now, compared to the other boss fights in the series, the lady's fight is extremely simplistic. Essentially, she just circles around you and you use a mirror to hurt her. It's simple, suspenseful, and fits her character. The Thin Man, I'm gonna be honest, has the worst boss fight of the three. I get that the Thin Man isn't actually the final boss, that's Monster 6, but thematically he feels like the final one, and while he might not be the final boss, he's definitely the main overarching antagonist. Anyways, with the Thin Man, Mono finally unleashes his psychic abilities and uses them to kick the Thin Man's ass. Mechanically though, it's basically just copy the Thin Man's pose while he's tweaking out and win. Hypnotist definitely has the most mechanically complex fight of the three, which isn't saying a lot, but whatever. How the fight works is that instead of directly attacking you, the Hypnotist breaks apart the asylum and drops debris on you, and you gotta hit the gongs in order to stun him and shoot the eyeballs on his hands. After you do that twice, his head falls down, you shoot his head, and then you win. I actually love the visual of the asylum falling apart while he attacks you. Maybe one of the coolest imagery out of any of the boss fights in the games. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to know where the debris is gonna fall, but that's my only real problem with it. Actually, I do have one more problem. The music here sucks. I think the soundtrack of Little Nightmares 3 is pretty good, but they really dropped the ball on this final boss theme. Like, instead of it being some really cool climactic song, it's just the chorus going, which is honestly really underwhelming for the big showdown. Okay, you know what though? Most people play Little Nightmares for the lore. And what's Otto's lore, huh? Well, let's look at what the game gives us. He's angry, he's old, he's a hypnotist. Wait, I just realized he never hypnotizes anyone in the game. He's evil. Yeah, the game basically tells us nothing. Wanna know why? That's because his lore is locked behind other media. Great! I just love it when horror franchises force me to view other media to understand basic plot details. It's so fun! Anyways, we can learn Otto's backstory from the Little Nightmares podcast. Yeah, a podcast. I have zero clue why they did a podcast instead of an audiobook or something. Like, are they setting up the scene where the janitor interviews the lady on his podcast? Anyways, I do not like the podcast, mainly because it explains what the Nowhere actually is, even though the reason why so many people like the stories of these games is because of how ambiguous they are. But sure, God forbid people think for themselves. Anyways, to give a quick summary, the podcast follows a girl named Noon. No, not no one. It's pronounced Noon. As she talks to a psychologist about all the scary Nowhere adventures she's been having. Plot twist, her psychologist is Otto. Okay, to explain this, I have to get into the lore. Essentially, the podcast explains that the Nowhere is a scary nightmare dimension, and the real world is a place called the Counties. Otto is a normal psychologist who lives in the Counties. Actually, wait, no, he's not normal. Like, who has that head shape? Anyways, we learn that Otto had a little sister named Cece who disappeared after having a bunch of nightmares about the Nowhere. And now as an adult, he experiments on the children at the asylum to try and learn more about the Nowhere and what happened to his sister. While a bit cliche, I think this backstory actually has potential. I like the idea of it. I like how his motive is somewhat understandable. He just wants to find out what happened to his missing sister. However, he goes way too far, exploiting and harming vulnerable children in order to reach the Nowhere. The problem, when the hell does Little Nightmares 3 ever bring this up? And why do I have to listen to a podcast to understand the motive of a video game villain? Also, Otto's actions in the podcast have zero relationship to his actions in the game. How did he get to the Nowhere? And what part of his plan to find his sister involved in turning into a giant kaiju? It just makes no sense. Hey, Editor H-Man here. So, I've heard this theory that the Hypnotist isn't actually Otto, but rather a resident masquerading as him. This technically isn't confirmed, but I figured I would mention it because I know some people would mention it if I didn't. For those of you who are curious, all my criticisms stay the same. In fact, he'd actually be a worse final boss if this theory is true. As if the theory is true, that means he has zero relationship to the main protagonist. The only positive this adds to the Hypnotist is now that because he is an auto, that means all his actions don't have to reflect autos. But Alright, that's it. Returning to your regularly scheduled programming. While Otto has the making of a good final boss, he misses the mark in every possible opportunity. It's honestly kinda sad. In an alternate timeline, he could have been up there with the Lady and Thin Man. Whatever, I guess. I shouldn't be surprised since this is the same game that gave us the Monster Baby. Who the hell would say the Monster Baby is their favorite character?
I would!
Anyways, I guess for some positive news, I've been really looking forward to the next Little Nightmares project. That's right. The Stumble Guys crossover. Let's go. This is what Little Nightmares needs right now. Okay, in all seriousness, I'm definitely going to be reviewing the VR game when it comes out, and I'm really excited for it. Mainly so we don't have to repeat the situation where everyone's already reviewed the game I'm covering and I'm way behind everyone else.
Do the flop, do the flop. Everybody do the flop, do the